see that coming down. This chart on the right-hand side is the interest rate. And the key one to look out for is this one in red, which you see sort of steps down and is basically at zero. This is the United States, this is the Fed. And that zero sort of period there is where the United States was throwing money into the economy as a result of COVID to try to get it growing again. And as that economy came roaring back and inflation started to come up, then you'll see that the Fed has been very aggressively increasing the interest rate there in order to try to get inflation down. We think that the Fed maybe will have one more increase, possibly in June, but then that will be it, and we'll start to see those interest rates coming down. This is important in terms of demand. You know, as interest rates go up, people don't borrow so much money, it's expensive. They don't spend so much money on their credit cards. Companies don't borrow money to invest in new technology or capabilities because the cost of capital is high, and so on. However, we do think that this is peaked and interest rates will start to come down, which is a positive for consumption and for investment as well. The other sort of thing to note about higher interest rates is that this generally means that your currency is going to get stronger. If the interest rate in the United States is 5% and it's still zero in Japan, and people are going to be generally buying US dollars, which makes that US dollar even stronger. And that's definitely something that we saw right the way throughout 2022. We think that that's peaked now. We think that many economies many currencies will start to strengthen a little bit against the US dollar as we get into the second half of this year. It's an important point for consumption. And again, so sort of focusing in on Asia, this is what we've seen in terms of inflation. You can see the time charts at the bottom there. We do think that inflation has peaked and is starting to come down now, but we do have some concerns about what we call sticky inflation. So, you know, you might be expecting that inflation is coming down because the global economy is, supply chains are working itself, and the shock of Ukraine, for example, has been worked through the system. But particularly when we're thinking about food prices, energy prices, we do see these staying higher for longer. This is a bit of a concern. And also a greater concern if central bank economies decide then to keep their interest rates higher for longer. This will dampen down economic activity. I mentioned there about the outlook for the global economy. This is focusing in on economies here within Asia. And what you're looking at there, this chart here, we've got two colours. The dark colour there is our forecast at the end of December 2022. And then the light blue bar, that's our latest forecast at the end of March. And you'll see for many of economies on this chart here that we've upgraded our outlook as a result directly of China's opening. So you can see the economies there that we think will benefit most. And most economies in Asia that have anything to do with Chinese domestic demand will be benefiting much more. Okay? It's less the case that those economies that were exporting commodities to China are going to be benefiting this time. It's a bit of an unbalanced recovery. It's more about private consumption, less about manufacturing. Exports are weak. Manufacturing in China is weak at the moment. So therefore the commodities coming from, say, Indonesia or maybe Malaysia into China, they won't benefit as much as anybody that's selling something directly to Chinese consumers. Okay. And then I mentioned this about currencies, and these are currencies for Asia as well. Again, you can see the dark blue bar there is 2022, and the blue bar there is 2023. So for most of the economies that we see in the region, they will be appreciating slightly against the US dollar. One thing to keep in mind about Japan, Japan's currency has been very, very weak against the US dollar. It's about 140 to the US dollar at the moment. We do expect that to change, but Japan at the moment is incredibly cheap, and I strongly recommend you to go there. I spent the month of October there, and it was your money goes a long way in Japan at the moment. Tourism there is, as we know, booming again. Hotel prices are going through the roof, but in terms of getting out and consuming within the economy, it's a very cost-effective place to go at the moment. Okay. that was my sort of global outlook, thinking about the global economy. Just to recap on that, we do think that this year we'll see growth. It's not anemic growth, but it's not stellar growth either. It's pretty sort of steady as she goes growth. We do see that accelerating in 2024 and beyond, as we sort of get over that inflation, as we get over high interest rates, but there's still a lot of risk, and not least in terms of geopolitical risk. I'm just very briefly going to take you through some of the work that we do as Economist Impact. And Economist Impact brings together all of those capabilities of the Economist Group, the research, the digital capabilities, the websites, all of the assets that we make, video, infographics, white papers and so on, to look at specific issues in order to have impact. So we do the research, we generate the content with which to engage those audiences. And this is a that we did at the beginning, end of 2021, 2022. I was in Manila in October of last year to share the findings of this. This is a piece of research that we did with Airbnb, and it was looking in that sort of post-COVID environment. Let's take a look at sort of people's attitudes and values when it comes to sustainable tourism. So we did a big survey, about 4,500 respondents. You can see the countries there around the region, asking them about their attitudes to travel, tourism, with a particular sort of sustainability lens on that as well. We then followed that up with a series of expert interviews as well. And these are some of the findings here. So this is just a sort of top level view. The desire for conscious tourism cuts across geographies. So if you look at that blue bar there, in all of those countries, this is where people are saying that sustainable tourism is important to them. And just to highlight places like India, Malaysia, Philippines, 97, 94, 98% of respondents saying that yes, sustainable tourism is important to me. Now, the other interesting thing about this survey is that we did it by age groups, by sort of demographics, Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers, and so on. And you see, particularly if you look at the younger generation, that the responses to this question are much higher. So young people really have it in their heads that yes, you know, as we can travel more post-COVID, we will be taking greater account of sustainability issues within that. And so, you know, what are those aspects of sustainability? And breaking them down into economic, social, environmental, cultural, and community as well. And again, if you go through this paper, which you can find online, you can see some of those cuts by countries, by age groups, and what's most important to them. But this is how we broke down that sort of, you know, how do you understand sustainable tourism? It's a term that we use all the time, but actually, you know, what does it mean, and what does it mean to consumers? And then finally, there's a bit of a focus in there around technology as well. We wanted to sort of find out how important technology was to for travel and tourism, and how people are using it. So I would urge you to go and have a look at that paper. It's still pretty fresh, even though it's a year or so since we've done the survey. I think the findings there will be very relevant to you. Okay, I think I'm just going to click over because I'm pretty much out of time, but the EIU has its own tourism outlook. Again, you can find online. Just to wrap up then, because I am in time, there's an article in The Economist just last month describing the global economy as the Mona Lisa economy, and what on earth does it mean by that? Well, it was referencing, of course, the Mona Lisa, the painting, and as you look at the Mona Lisa, is she smiling? Is she frowning? It's very difficult to sort of understand. And the article was saying it's very difficult to understand where the global economy is at the moment. Forecasting is very challenging. There's a quote there from Christine Lagarde, who's the president of the European Central Bank, when she was asked about what's going on with interest rates. Are they going to be going up or down? It's just too difficult. We don't know. There's just too much conflicting data within the economy at the moment for us to have a really clear view of where things are going. And just to talk through one final chart, this is a very interesting one. So when we do forecasting, we have economic models and so on, but we look at lots of data. We look at some hard data. You know, is pay going up or down? Are more or less people being employed in the economy? That's hard data. You've also got soft data in terms of people's opinions. Do you think the next 6 months will be better or worse than before? And so on. And what this chart here is showing is this massive divergence between soft indicators and hard indicators as a result of COVID, and there's still quite a gap between them. So if you look at some of the data, you might have a much better, more optimistic picture of the economy going forward. If you look at some of the sentiment analysis, you'd expect the world to be in recession by the end of the world. So this is why, just sort of highlighting, it's a very challenging time at the moment. We've had all of these shocks to the global economy, from crisis, from COVID to military action in Europe as well. We've got the underlying fundamental tension between the world's #1 economy and the world's #2 economy, China and the US, particularly when it comes to technology, which is really impacting on supply chains and trade and everything like this as well. But actually underlying all of that, we've got some pretty decent growth, particularly here within the region. We all know that. Young, growing economies, rapid urbanization, rapid application of technology and so on, which are good drivers of growth. So just to wrap up, a couple of final things then. So do keep your eye on this relationship between the United States and China. It's in the deep freeze at the moment. Biden and Xi Jinping met in Bali at the G20 last September-October time, and there was expectation that we'd have some kind of meeting between the two. Then we had the balloon incident, and relations are still very much in the deep freeze at the moment. It only takes one jet to bang into another jet over the South China Sea for us to see a massive diplomatic incident. We've got real tensions around Taiwan, and we've got Mr. Kim in North Korea throwing missiles about all over the place. So, there's a lot of geopolitical risk. You really need to keep your eye on that key relationship there. We also need to think about, how do we rebuild globalization? How do we rebuild it to take account of the global south, to take account of the rise of China and of India as well, make sure that it's working for everybody. So that's a big discussion. Another major one is AI, and that's another very clever cover from The Economist just a couple of weeks ago. The massive promise of AI and all the risks and fears that we have about it as well. What are you doing with AI? We're playing around with it ourselves. It's quite a fascinating tool. We have one of the founders of DeepMind on our board as well, helping us to understand what we should be doing as the Economist Group when it comes to AI. Let's not forget that this year is India's year. India holds the presidency for the G20, which takes place in September in Delhi, and the B20, the Business 20, takes place just before that. We're quite closely involved in that, and the focus there is really on India's evolving role within the global economy. India has a very special, specific, independent role to play. It's buying massive amounts of oil from Russia, which doesn't make America very happy. But on the same time, it's in a very solid security grouping with Japan, with Australia, with the US, to push back against China here. India has its own position that it's been mapping out at the moment, and it's overtaken China in terms of population, and its economy will be growing consistently at a higher rate than China in the coming years as well. So a very interesting time for China, very important for tourism here, of course, as well. And then finally, Mr. Trump, part 2, waiting in the wings. We have a presidential election next year. When talking about forecasting about the global economy, that's challenging. When I'm talking about US presidential elections, that's a big challenge. We don't know, but be prepared for Mr. Trump. That's it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.